Hello, my name is Max Haiven. I'm Canada Research Chair in the Radical Imagination, and I'm here to speak to you a little bit about my chapter, Financialization and Failure, Lessons from the Anxious University for the Routledge International Handbook of Failure. In this chapter, I try and do three things. First, I try and frame financialization as a period, a process, and a logic. As a period, it refers to typically the period from around 1973, within which the power of the financial sector, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector has grown. As a process, it refers to that increasing power and influence not only over the economy, but also over politics, society, and culture at large. And as a logic, it refers to a particular framework or pattern within capitalist development that leads to the incredible power of the financial sector and ultimately, bad news, to crisis. This crisis, which occurs and has occurred at many points in capitalist history, is just one indication of the way that financialization and the financial sector is constantly failing. But in the second section of this chapter, I look at a number of different ways in which finance is entangled with failure. The first is that there is and has been, over the last decade or so, a catastrophic failure to regulate finance. Governments around the world, for a whole variety of reasons I go into, have been reluctant to meaningfully regulate the financial sector. But there's also what I speak of as a failure of the imagination, to the extent that we think simply regulating the financial sector would be enough. Thinking that we just need to regulate the financial sector avoids really the failures of the imagination around social policy that allowed financialization to get to the point at which we find it. The second element of failure that I see inherent to financialization is that ultimately financialization and the financial sector depend on failure. The reality is that most financial bets fail. Most firms that are supported by the financial sector, if we can indeed call it support, also fail. Failure is in some ways baked into the mechanisms of finance. It's anticipated that most ventures will fail. And in fact, good financial agents and operatives in our economy bet on the failure. Third, however, there is a broader issue at work, which is that financialization is, I argue, the failed imagination of capital. Finance, I argue, is the way that capitalism comes to imagine itself and imagine the world that it's dominating. But it is an imagination that is constantly failing to accurately or appropriately apprehend the complexities of the real world. And as a result, those failures and that failed imagination get downloaded onto more vulnerable populations and institutions as this system is in sort of a constant state of failure. And it's our failure to not imagine it as such, but instead fall prey to the myths and legends that the financialized system propounds. In the third section of the paper, I then turn to the financialized public university in the anglophone North Atlantic as an example of where this financialized politics of failure hits the ground. I look at the anxiety epidemic, as it's called, among university students and also university staff, and the way in which the pressure put on students to invest properly in their education for future payoff has dramatic negative effects on their mental health. However, I also, and here I'm drawing on work that I've done with my colleague Aris Komporozos Athanasiou at University College London, propose that there is a way that students are fighting back. And that way that they're fighting back is indeed the forms of withdrawal and refusal that students are exhibiting as they profess their anxiety that debilitates them and makes it impossible for them to compete in the rat race that the university has been made to represent in these financialized times. Now, we're not arguing that students are intentionally or willfully malingering or faking their symptoms. We're not participating in that kind of defamation. Instead, we're wondering if a new form of resistance and rebellion is brewing within financialization amongst a new generation who has known nothing but financialization. In my conclusion, I move towards the question of what this would imply for social movement studies across a range of disciplines. And I think there's much to learn from the study of failure when it comes to thinking about how we can change the world or not.